Hello. On my second channel, I did a video about civic engagement, and for part of it, I had pictures of myself dropping out of the ceiling with the push of a button. I'd like to show how that's done in Unity. First, I'll start with a new scene. Right now I've got a new project, but otherwise I can right-click, go to Create, and Scene. Next, change the aspect ratio found at the top of the window. Go with 16:9, which is good for a lot of cell phones. Need a canvas to mount pictures. UI canvas, I'm going to call this background canvas. Don't want it to be a constant pixel size. It will scale with the screen size. So if a phone is larger or smaller, the image should increase or decrease with the screen size. Have a camera. I'm going to choose the main camera. You can have different cameras and then switch between them. Next, background. I'm going to go to Photoshop, do a single sprite. In Photoshop, really quickly and easily, use the rectangle tool and make a sky. Back in Unity, go to the canvas and UI and create an image. We'll call this, take this new asset. It's a single sprite. Just want to make sure to remove the PSD matte, because that sometimes creates gray from anti-aliasing around the edges of a sprite, an image. Apply it, click on the background image in the canvas. Over here in the inspector on the right side, source image, we could just drag the background over there. It'll be changed to bottom right corner here. We'll put the background on the entire canvas. Prefabs. I'd like to create 4 prefabs. This is images that will drop from the sky. So in Photoshop, I could make different things. I could use the pen tool. Just make something strange shaped, change its color. It's also important in Photoshop to go to image size and change this to hard edges, nearest neighbor hard edges. That way, when images go to Unity, there won't be a strange gray outline around them, a fuzzy gray outline. It gets rid of anti-aliasing. Brush tool. Give it a mouth and hold down the Alt key with the layer, the mouth layer, to put it inside just the body. It'll only show up where the body is. It's a nice way to make the lines perfectly align with each other. Different shapes, different colors. I like to go around the edges of my shapes with soft, round, pressure, opacity, and flow. I just go around the edges and make it a little darker so that it looks like it has some depth to it. Use the Alt key, and that gets rid of all of that black fuzziness around the outsides. So now I've got a monster. All of them, put them in a folder. Call it Monster 1. I can do this with a few more monsters. Can make some guides. View, guides, new guide layout, and just go two columns, 2 rows. The measurement there. Okay, so now I've got 4 monsters, and I can bring over this one Photoshop to Unity and break it up into multiple sprites. So, create a 2D object. Sprite doesn't make a difference because it's going to get changed anyway. I'll call this Monster 1. From multiple sprites, go to the inspector and change the mode to multiple. Remove that PSD matte again. Go to Sprite Editor, hit Apply, and here, same as setting guides in Photoshop, you can just set it to 2 by 2, then Apply. And now each monster is its own sprite. So Monster 1 can get a giant monster. And I'll scale it down a bit. There, 0.3 looks good. This prefab is going to need rigid body 2D so that it can move around the environment. We need 4 of these. Control D to copy them and just change their number. Monster 2 and drag the image over. Monster 3, drag the image over. Monster 4, drag the image over. Now there's 4 different monsters. Drag them all down to the project folder, and now they get a light blue box around them. They're a prefab. Next, a button. Just like the monsters, I'm going to have multi-sprites. Here I've got 2 of them. There's the button on the left side that isn't pressed, and then the button on the right side that's squished down a little bit. And all I did was move the top part and the text down a little bit. For the button, I'm going to go to UI and create a new canvas. Call that the button canvas. Create an empty object, button holder. That lets us move around the entire button and anything inside of it. Underneath that, that's where I put the actual button, which is found in UI, button. Import TextMesh Pro. And then I want 2 images. Button off, button on. Go down to the button. Once again, multiple sprites. Get rid of PSD matte, sprite editor. There we go. Slice it in half. So button off gets 1 image. Button on gets the other image. Button itself won't get any text. Don't need that part of it. Got to make sure that the button and the button images match. So the button is there behind everything else. We'll fix that later. First, let's get the button working. Button script. Click mouse to activate. Want to do that. So I'm just going to turn off the background for now and work with the button. This is where I'll change the alpha of the button and get rid of it. So the button is still there. It will still work. Script. So create folder scripts. Just call it spawner. I'll add a header, monsters. So there's a header, so it'll show up in the inspector, and 4 monster prefab game objects that are all public. So they can be added in the inspector in Unity. Header button. We'll have a spawn button, and then the 2 button pictures, off and on. Create a public void. I'll call it press monster button. You can call it anything you want. I'm going to have it initiate a spawn monster. Private void spawn monster, which will instantiate. Let's go with monster prefab 1 at, it'll be the transform position and quaternion identity of whatever object I put this script on. So I'm going to put it on the button. I'll go to the button and I'll drag the spawner script, and then it's got the monster prefabs, button, spawn button, all of those. So drag the button over, button off, button on, and the 4 monster prefabs. You don't want to get the ones in scene. Actually, can get rid of those. Monster 2, Monster 3, Monster 4. And the button has this on-click event. You can click this, drag the button over here, and then find spawner and press monster button. Press play to test. When I click the button, monster number 1 spawns. Next, button script. Want to press a button to activate it, not just a mouse click. In the update method, I'll have an if input get code key code space. I'll use the space button, but this can be changed to whatever button you want. When the space bar is pressed, it will spawn a monster. So now spawn monster can be used with a button press in-game or the space bar being pressed on the keyboard. Save it, test it. Pressing the space bar, oh, it spawns a lot of monsters all at once. Get key down. Try that. Now only 1 monster spawns every time the button is pressed. Next, change the button image with the script. So there were 2 public game objects up here, spawn button off and spawn button on. One is the game button when it's off. That's its default state. That's what it starts with. The other is the button on when the button's been pressed. And I want to change between those 2 images when the space bar or the mouse button click the button on screen. In the start method, to begin the scene, I would like the spawn button off to be true, to be turned on, for that image to be true. So spawn button off is set to true, and spawn button on, when the button is pushed down, that's set to false. That image will not show up. So the game starts like that. Whenever a button is pushed, whether it's a mouse click or the space bar, I want the image to change. So that would happen in the spawn monster area. I'm going to change these in start. I'll put them under their own method called reset button, private void reset button, and paste those button images here, true and false. So anytime I want to reset, I can use this reset button method. Next, I need to change the button so that it's pressed down. And I would do that where we spawn the monster. That'll be the same, whether we're initiating this with a spacebar press or with a mouse click. When the monster spawns, the button should be down. And it needs to wait a little bit of time, so we need a coroutine for that. Start coroutine, button pressed. Go a little bit lower, IE numerator, button pressed. First, I'm going to set the button off image to false and the button on image to true. Then, yield return new, wait for seconds, 0.2f. So it'll wait for 0.2 of a second, a slight delay, and then reset the button. Save it, try it out. Using the mouse, the image changes. It looks like one of the images scaled incorrectly. Press the space bar, and that works too. Yeah, they're slightly different sizes, so I need 600. Press it, and it looks like the button is being pressed down. Space bar. Time for sound effects for the button. It should make a clicking sound when pressed. Go to the button, add a component, audio source, and we don't want it to play on awake, and we don't want it to loop, but that's an option. Do need to add a source. You can make your own. just by going up to a wall switch, anything around, and recording that sound. There are many programs that are free on phones that let you record whatever audio is there, and it can be an MP3 WAV file, whatever works best, and you can bring those over to Unity. Drag the button click sound over to the audio click, back in the code, add the audio source. I'm just going to call it button press SFX. The sound effect will be added to the coroutine with the button animation changing. So button press SFX dot play. Drag the audio source up, press play, and test. Now there's a button sound and the monster spawns. The background still blocks the image of the button though, so sorting layers have to be dealt with. For the canvas, I'll add a sorting layer, and I will call it background. After creating a sorting layer, you need to go back to the game object and add the layer again. So background, then go to the button canvas, do the same thing, create a layer, button, monsters as well. Button canvas gets button, now it's up front, monster prefabs, and change them to monsters so that they'll be in front of the background behind the button. Spawn point. We don't want the monsters spawning on the button. We can have them spawning somewhere else. I'll create an empty game object, call it a spawn point, and we can see the spawn point with a little circle in the middle of the screen. We'll just drag it over, drag it up, and now it's just outside of the game screen. I have the monsters spawning in the sky and dropping down. Instantiating the prefab at the spawn point. I'll have a header spawn point, and I'm going to have serialized field private game object spawn point. So it's private, it can't be changed from other scripts. It doesn't need to. The spawn point should remain the same. Go down to instantiating the monster, and in front of transform position, type spawn point. Drag the spawn point over in the inspector, and then test. The monster now spawns up in the sky. Random prefabs, because there is more than one. There's 4 prefabs, and they should all be included. At the top, make a private int called random prefab. In spawn monster, where the monsters are instantiated, there are different ways to do this. I really like to make a random if statement. We'll add random prefab equals random range 1, 5. If you go 1, 4, it excludes that last number, the 5th number. So if I want four different types of spawns, I'm going to have a 1, 5 instead of a 4. It'll be one number above that. Then I'm going to make an if statement. Move this line, we'll cut this and paste it in here. So if the random number equals 1, then it will instantiate monster prefab 1. And copy this and change each of these to a different number. Call this 2, prefab 2, 3, prefab 3, 4, prefab 4. So each random number will spawn a different monster prefab. And what I like about this random range is it doesn't have to just be a direct number. It doesn't have to be random prefab equals 1. It could be random prefab is greater or equal to 1. And so it could be random prefab if it's greater than 1 and less than or equal to 2. So then the number could be a 1 or 2, and that prefab would be instantiated. So you can have probability. You don't just have to have a range from 1 to 5. You could have a range from 1 to 101, and then assign a range of numbers for each prefab, so that it would be a percentage. You do 10%, right? You could do 20%, 30%. It would be really easy to change those. Save it, test it. Now random monsters spawn. Next, colliders, because the monsters are just falling right through the ground. So for all the monsters, create a collider. I like a capsule collider. It doesn't really matter. Put these all back on screen to make sure that the colliders line up properly. So down here in the monsters inspector, we can edit the collider. Second monster, I would decrease that to 3, and monster 4. All of these up in the inspector, override, apply all. So now those changes are going to apply to the prefabs. Remove the monsters from the scene. Going to add a 2D object. It can just be a square and make that really, really long. Just call it 20. That'll work. That goes across the whole screen. And I'll lower that so it'll be positioned in the land. That works nicely. And give it a box collider. Box collider 2D. The box is exactly where the sprite is. Just get rid of the image. Don't really need that. Just need the box collider. Just need something for the monsters to hit. Test this out, and yep, the monsters are hitting each other and they're hitting the floor. Next, object movement, so that they all don't fall straight down. Give them a little bit of randomness. Make a new script. I'll call it monster movement. Start with the rigid body, 2D, and I'm just going to abbreviate it to RB. And start, that RB, that rigid body, will get component of the rigid body 2D on the game object. Then RB dot add force, go with vector 3 up. You can go in different directions. I want to send them up a little bit. And a random range, so it'll be multiplied by a random range between 0 and 10, so that they get a different amount of force applied to them. The force mode 2D will be impulse. Also like a random rotation. So transform.rotation equals quaternion.euler 0, 0, and this is the axis where I want to put in the random range. If you want to add a random rotation to the other axes, then you can. You just add a random range to where the zeros are, and now it will rotate in other directions, other axes. We'll just have it from 0 to 10. That's it for movement. Get those 4 monsters again, take the monster movement script, and apply it to them. When you make a change to one of the prefabs, you want it to apply to all the prefabs. So override, apply all. Physics material, adding on some 2D physics. So the monsters, right click, create 2D physics material. Monster physics, that's what I'll call it. A little friction, perfect. Don't really want bounciness. I can apply that to each of the monsters just by dragging it over to the rigid body. Click on a prefab, drag it over. Prefab, drag it over. And I'll apply that to the floor as well. Ground collider, and that can have the physics as well. Another thing worth doing is any game objects that are moving quickly, so there's the monsters here, their rigid body can be set, the collision detection can be set to continuous, and if it's on discrete, sometimes the game object will move through walls or floors. It won't detect them. So I changed this to continuous. Last is a cursor. Once again, I'll go to Photoshop. It's a good color. How about purple? Don't have any purple in the scene. Give it some nails. Okay, so I've got an image. I want to use it as a cursor. I go up top here to the inspector. Texture type won't be sprite, it's going to be cursor. Apply that. Go to File, Build Settings, Player Settings, and then select the cursor. And I want hand, maximized. There, I've got a little hand cursor. It's tiny. Press a button, and the monster hits the ground, rolls around a little. Random monsters. Spacebar. That's it. That's how to do it. Whole lot of action. It's easy to add on more and more. It's just something you could have fun with. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe if you want to see more videos. I'm going to have a cartoon series coming out soon, and there's always that second channel if you want to see some serious videos. I do have a monster game on the Play Store that you can play. It's called Greed Monster.